Hello and welcome. My name is Kaylee and this is Bloom Sewing Studio. I'm so happy that you're here today as I have a very exciting video planned. If you're new here, welcome. I like to make videos about sewing and crafting. I'm getting into knitting now. I create videos about things that I've made, my plans of things to make. Sometimes I do sew-alongs, and I also just like to take you along on my journey of learning new things in my sewing. So if that's something that you're interested in, please hit the subscribe button and we'd love to have you. I'm going to show you something that's really cool. It is called the Lutterloh System. This has been around since like the 1930s, but it's really cool and unique pattern making system that helps you draft patterns from your home without having to buy any patterns. So let's get into it. If you are a sewer, you may be familiar with the big four pattern companies, the little packets that come with the tissue paper and the instructions, or even indie pattern designers that are now all over Instagram and either having to print out PDF pattern pages or possibly sending it off to an AO large scale printer. Well, the Lutterloh system is unique in the fact that you don't have to have any of those things. All you need is his system and some tracing paper. Inside the box comes this binder, and inside the binder we have a nifty kit of tools that we are going to use to create our patterns. As well as in the binder for the system, you will find several patterns, over 200 different patterns that you can choose from to create for your wardrobe. This is the main system book, but you can also purchase other collections or supplements. Let's say you are more of a petite or smaller person, you could get the extra small patterns that are specifically created for smaller people. They also have a curvy supplement that you can get specifically for curvy or children or men. But inside the main pattern book, there's an allotment of all of those. Not too many children or men's patterns, but definitely plenty of women's patterns in both the curvy and the smaller sizes. Inside that binder and compiled in all of those patterns, you're going to find illustrations of different looks that you can pick. So here's one that I'm going to be making today. On the front is the illustration. I'm going to go with this blouse up here. And on the back side is actually the little pattern pieces. And they're so small. But the cool thing about this system is that you use two measurements, your bust and your hips, to enlarge this pattern to fit your body. Now, that doesn't mean there won't need to be adjustments made. Of course, with all pattern pieces, we need to tailor them to fit our body just the way that we would like them to. But it's going to enlarge them into our size. It's a really cool pattern and honestly has become my new favorite way of making clothes because it's so simple and it barely takes up any space in my sewing room. If I haven't mentioned before, this system does not come with instructions for each pattern, but if you know the general basics of sewing and constructing clothing, then that shouldn't be an issue for you. But if you like to have a little bit of a visual, I do have a sew along, so be sure to stick around for that later on in the video. This is what comes with the system. We've got these tools here that are going to help us, along with the binder that comes with instructions on how to use the system. There's also basic sewing instructions after the instructions on how to use the system, as well as several patterns. This set of tools here is key to create the patterns. We need all these tools in order to make it happen. First, we have this unique measuring tape. The unique part is this section here at the top. As you can see, there are black and red numbers. These are even numbers and they're in centimeters. Next to these numbers are small holes that we will be using to place the pin in, and we will be putting the pin in the hole that corresponds with our bust and or hip measurement. So let's say my bust is 90 centimeters. I would put the pin in the small hole here at 90 centimeters. If by chance your measurement is an odd number, you would round it up to the next higher even number. The next tool is a marking tool to help you plot the points, and some tape to help you tape down the paper to the tracing paper and also some pins that will work as an anchor point for the tape measure to spin around on. This is the pattern I will be making today. It is the pattern number 179. On the back side, we can see that there are several markings. Each of these yellow shapes are the pattern pieces that we will be enlarging today. This illustration here is how the pattern will look from the back. Now we're going to dive into what all of these symbols mean here on the pattern page to help us better understand how to read the pattern and construct it later on. Each of these pattern pieces have a letter on them. These letters help us recognize what the pattern piece is, and we will be able to determine what those are by using the symbols page here as a key. A for front, B for back, E for sleeve, G for collar. We can also see that the collar and the collar stand are not distinguished from one another. They are both G. Okay, so let's look at some additional markings on this page to help us understand what's going on. This line here with the arrow is the grain line marking, which you can see that marking on or near each pattern piece so that you know how to lay it out on the fabric. This dashed line here means that it will be cut on the fold and that there will not be a seam. We see that on the back piece here, meaning to cut it on the fold. This wavy line here means that you will gather, and we can see that here on the sleeve, and it will be gathered in to fit the cuff. These slash lines we will see on many of the pattern pieces, such as the cuff, the placket, and each of the collar pieces. That symbolizes where you will apply interfacing, and in some cases where you will create a facing. If you look closely at the sleeve piece here, there is a 5 centimeter marking. This symbolizes the slit that you will need to create, and up at the top of the sleeve there's a little line marking where a notch will be to line it up with the seam at the shoulder later on. And this V symbolizes the front of the sleeve. These plus or X marks are of most importance, as these will be the location where the pin will be placed in order to draft out the pattern pieces. Down here at the bottom of the symbols page, we see markings that will help us to determine who the pattern is best suited for. The white mannequin symbolizes the pattern that is better suited for slim figures. The black mannequin symbolizes the pattern that will be best suited for fuller figures. This knitted sweater symbol instructs us that the pattern would need to be made in a stretch fabric. If it is not present, then the pattern is best suited for woven fabrics, such as these here on this pattern piece. Now we are going to dive into tracing this out. Grab the tape that it came with and tape down the pattern onto your tracing paper. Then with your bust measurement, put the pin in the hole next to the number that matches your bust measurement. Then we are going to push the pin into the X or plus mark of the piece that we are going to trace. Today I'm going to be tracing the back piece. Now the measuring tape can rotate freely around. On the pattern piece, you will find lines and dots with numbers next to them. These numbers here on the paper correspond with the numbers that you will find on the yellow part of the tape measure. All dots above and including the waist will be done with your bust measurement, and all dots below the waist will be done with your hip measurement. Now take the tape measure, and we want to be sure that it lines directly up with this line here. Next to this line is the number 28. Follow the tape measure up to the corresponding number of 28 on the tape measure, pull the tape measure tight, and mark on the inside of the tape measure. I am making the markings very large so that you can see them, but you don't need to make them this large at home. Now we will move the tape measure to the next line, which is 26.5. Follow the tape measure to that number and mark it. Continuing on, we will line it up with the next number, which is 28 again. Pull the tape measure tight, follow it up and make a marking by the 28 centimeter mark on the tape measure. The next one is 25.5. Follow up the tape measure and mark it next to the number 25.5. Now we're going to move to the first line in the arm side, follow it up to the 17 and mark it. This one here in the middle of the arm side is a little bit unique. Number 11, as you can see, is through the pattern piece, and you can't really mark it or it'd be on the pattern paper. So instead, we are going to take one of our extra pins and put a mark through the paper with the pin, and we will come back and mark that with the marker later when we remove the paper. So we're just going to follow this pattern on all the lines all the way around the pattern piece. Now we are at a number at the waist. With this, you will still use your bust measurement in order to mark the waist dots. Now that we are finished marking all the dots at and above the waist, we are going to take out the pin and adjust it by putting it into the measurement that matches our hip measurement. Mine is 94, and so I'm going to put it in 94 and put it straight back into the plus mark in the pattern piece. Now we will continue marking as we did before by marking all of the dots below the waist with our hip measurement. I will not show the remainder of this part. Now that we have all the dots marked out, we are going to connect them. You can use any kind of rulers that you have, though the pattern system does come with this paper one, but they also have some really nice plastic ones you can purchase as well. This X mark here is where the pin was put on the pattern piece. It is also where you can mark the lengthen and shortening line to make adjustments to your pattern. Then be sure to add to your pattern all the necessary information that you're going to want to know, such as cutting on the fold, notches, labeling the pattern piece, and all the things like that. These pattern pieces do not come with seam allowance built into them, so be sure to add that on after you have finished tracing out the pattern. I added a 1/2 inch to mine, but you could also add 3/8 or even 5/8 if you'd like. Then make sure you also add your hem allowance because that is also not included in the pattern pieces. That way you can customize it exactly how you want it. I added 1 inch here. Then you can go ahead and cut out your pattern piece with scissors or a rotary cutter. I prefer a rotary cutter just because it goes by much faster. And now you have completed cutting out your first pattern piece. Repeat this process with all the other pieces on the pattern. Now this step is not essential, but for myself, I find it necessary. Here I am creating a mock-up or a toile just so I can know how the fit is going to look on me and be sure that I like the silhouette on my body. Alternatively, you can just measure out the pattern pieces if you are really great at fitting just by looking at the paper pieces, but I'm still learning that. So I am making a toile, and here soon you're going to hear me talk about the toile process and how it fit and what adjustments that I made before I dive into the sew along. Okay, so here is my mock-up. This is the first version. I think overall it looks really great, and I did not finish both sleeves because I just did the sleeves really to see how long they were, and they were shorter as expected. So I am going to lengthen this, and then I think it'll be good. It's hard to tell exactly how it's going to look when I just like pin it up like this, but I think it's looking really nice. I know what adjustments I need to make, and then I'm just going to cut it out in my final fabric, which is this beautiful cotton that I got from Beglorian Fabrics. It's more of a heavier weight cotton. I don't know how to describe it. See if you can see some of the weave in this. It's got like kind of a texture to it. Yeah, I'm hoping that it pairs really nicely with it and that it's not too thick. But yeah, I'm pretty much going to go adjust the pattern and then start cutting it out, and we'll sew it along together. So now I'm going to make that sleeve adjustment first by drawing a line down the middle of this pattern piece. That way I can have a 90-degree angle to base off this next line on, which I will draw parallel to the hem, like a lengthening and shortening line. Once I cut through that line, I'm going to be adding about 2 inches of paper in that space to give me the length for the sleeve that I really wanted. And now comes the fun part. We finally get to start cutting out the fabric so that we can sew it all together. So this piece right here is the front bodice piece, and you did not see me trace this one out, so I'm just going to mention a few things. Just like the seam allowance is not included in the pattern pieces, neither is the placket, so that's something that I did add. You can see here it's the slash lines next to the buttonholes, and I believe I added about 1.5 inches. And one of my favorite hacks for transferring darts onto the fabric is by cutting into the paper pattern, and then you fold that little piece over on the line of the dart edge. And after you do that, you can grab some kind of marking tool and transfer it on by tracing it. Here I use this red heat erasable pen, which I did test on a scrap piece of fabric previously just to make sure that it would actually erase with heat, and it worked just fine, so I felt comfortable using it on the fabric. I have had instances where I used a tool that didn't come out later, and so that's quite a bummer. So I'd be sure to make sure that it's going to erase from now on. Then I went ahead and transferred all the other markings that I saw onto the fabric so that I could know where to fold later on. All of my pieces are now cut out. I've got my 2 cuff pieces. Back here I've got the front pieces, the front and the back and the sleeves. And yeah, now I'm going to put this together. Okay, so like I said, when you make patterns from this book, it doesn't have instructions. So I'm going to walk you through some of the steps that you would normally do in the order that you would do them. This shirt has a dart, so we are first going to sew up the darts. Then we'll probably sew down the placket right here. So I'm going to need to apply interfacing to this section and also fold it over and sew the button placket. So a method that I like to use is to match up right sides together, the dart markings on the fabric, to help me get them lined up properly. And then I put pins in it. It's really simple with the white fabric, but it can be trickier when you have a darker color that you can't see through. And then when sewing a dart, you're going to want to start at the edge of the fabric and work your way towards the dart point. And don't backstitch at the dart point. We will tie those threads together later. Now for creating the placket, I made a 1-inch wide piece of interfacing and the length matched my shirt. I put that on and folded over and pinned the placket and sewed it down. Now with right sides together, you're going to attach the shoulder seams to each other, pin them and sew them together and finish the seams. I like to finish them with my serger for a nice clean finish, but there are other ways that you can do this if you don't have one. Then go ahead and give it a nice press when you're finished sewing the seam and finishing the seams. Okay, so now I've got the cuff pieces and I'm putting interfacing on them on this side only. I'm going to do that on this one as well. And then I'm going to apply interfacing onto the collar pieces and cross my fingers that they're the right size. I only need to apply interfacing onto one of the collar pieces and one of the collar stand pieces. Now I'm going to assemble the collar pieces by placing the collar pieces right sides together and sewing around the exterior of the collar. Then I will flip the corners, flip it, push the corners out, press it, and then we'll attach the undercollar to it. Now, when turning out the collar, you can use something sharp, but be sure not to use something too pointy that will push through the corner and put a hole in it. Sometimes scissors can be too pointy, so just be careful when doing that. Now that we've got this collar piece put together, we're going to take the collar stands and sandwich the collar piece in between them, right sides together. So here we've got one collar piece with its right side towards the collar, the other collar piece with its right side towards the collar, and then we're going to leave some extra space here at the end, like that. It won't look exactly like that, but to give it some room for the stands to stand up and attach to the shirt. Okay, so after that, now I'm going to clip and trim this section, turn it around, press it, and we're also going to press one of these edges up, well, towards the wrong side like this in preparation for later, which I probably should have done this first actually because I just sewed it down, so I'm going to have to unpick that and redo that part, but you're going to want that in preparation for later when we attach it to the shirt. So what I've done here is I've taken this collar piece. So you can see we've got the collar stand and the collar, and I've taken the piece of the collar that does not have the interfacing attached to it, and I attached that to the shirt right sides together. So here's the right side of the shirt, the back piece. This is the inside, and I have pinned it all the way across, lining up here where the collar stand meets the button placket. So it should be flush, and when we stitch that, we can roll back the seam allowance here and stitch right up to that edge. Then I've also got this pre-pressed, so when I'm done, I'll be folding that over to cover the seam that I just stitched, and then it will be like that. Okay, so for the next step, as you can see here, I've already pinned some of it, but basically we're going to be taking this piece and we're just putting it over the seam allowance of this piece. Like that. I'm putting it right over the stitch, and then I'm just going to pin it in place there, and we're going to do that all the way across. And then I like to flip it over and stitch in the ditch on the back, and then it's pretty even on the front too. Since you saw me last, I finally finished this collar part. It took me several tries, but I'm glad that it's done, and I think it looks very nice. So now I'm going to set that aside, and we're going to work on the sleeves. In the pattern book, I believe it says to cut it like 5 centimeters where this marking is, and that's for the slit in the sleeve. I don't know if you can see that. There's a little mark right here. We're going to measure 5 centimeters. Last time was about 2 inches. Last time I think I cut it another inch. They're joined. I'll just do it together. There's the front side of that. Now I'm going to, so this was not a part of the pattern piece. I don't know how they wanted me to finish this. According to the Lutterloh system, it didn't have anything for this that I saw, but I had another pattern that I recently did that had this. So this is how I know how to do this part. Anyway, we're going to grab a bias strip and we're going to attach it to this slit area. When you put it on there, you're going to line up one side, and I believe this is a little bit big for it, which is fine. Doesn't really matter. I can trim it. There we go. So it's going to kind of grade down like this and then go back out. We want to do that on both edges. This is right sides together right now. All right, so let's see if I can show you what just happened. Okay, like that. And this is the bias strip back here, and this is the sleeve. Now we're going to do that on the other side. So here's our piece. We're going to take that and we're going to press the seam allowance, and then we're going to press everything in place for the next step. So we want to push the seam allowance towards the bias binding strip, and then we're going to fold this probably to meet this first edge here of the strip. There we go. Now we're going to sew that down. Oh, that's just blurry. Okay. All right, so I sewed it again, and now it is attached. That looks very nice. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to put right sides together like this, so that now it looks like this. So we've lined up those edges, and we've got this here, and we're just going to put some stitches diagonally right here. We're going to bring it back like this, and then you're going to take the side that has the wider edge, and we're going to fold the fabric like that, and then sew a little tack down right here, so that later on when we are going to do buttons, it will just stay nicely like that. Ta-da! Now with right sides together, we are going to close up the sleeve and then we'll start working on the cuff. I sewed together the sleeves, I finished the seams, now I'm pressing them, pressing the seam back or towards the back of the garment. Okay, so now I've got the cuff pieces and I'm going to prep them by folding and pressing down the seam allowance for later. That way, kind of like what I did with the collar, that way it's ready to sew in place later on. So now what we're going to do is we're going to put gathering stitches here all the way across so that they can fit the length of the cuff. It's got quite a bit of gathering to do. We also want the cuff to be overhanging the seam allowance before when we put it on. So that's what we're going to go do at the machine now. And just start gathering them. And take my piece and start putting it on to see how much more I need to pull or loosen. And remember, when we put on this cuff, we want it to be a seam allowance distance from the edge. Now we're going to open this up and we're going to press the seam allowance down. And then after that, we're going to sew this, fold it back, and sew these together like this so that these two folds line up. Now you're going to clip all of these corners so that they turn out really nicely when you turn it around and it's not too bulky. Then we're going to flip them around. So now we're going to fold over, and that edge that we pre-pressed is going to go directly over, just over that stitched edge that we just did. And then we're going to pin that in place and we'll stitch it in the ditch closed. Very nice. Looks beautiful. All right, so we finished up with the sleeves very nicely. I did a top stitch all around and I think they turned out really nice. So now we're going to attach the sleeves into the armholes of the shirt. So line up right sides together, the side seams, sew it, and give it a nice finish with a serger or a zigzag stitch, whatever way you like to finish or that you have, and I'll meet you back. Okay, so here I've got the sleeve right side to right side, and I'm going to start by lining up the seam right here. You do have a mark here at the top. That mark was there when we traced out the pattern, so look for that and then use it to help you gather in or ease in the sleeve by lining that up at the seam at the top. And then we're just going to have to ease in this curve, which is going to be pretty tricky because it's pretty steep. Okay, so I allowed for a 1-inch hem. So in order to do that, I could do a 1/2 inch and then a 1/2 inch again. So that would look like, that would be easy. I'm thinking I might want to try a 1/4 inch and then 3/4 of an inch. Let's see what that would look like. Look like that, which I think will look really cool. So I think I'm going to try that method, and then I will stitch it down. Okay, so now we're going to give this a good press and move on to the buttons. All right, so I just measured it, and this is where I'm going to want, I'm going to weight this down. This is where I'm going to want my chest one, the top of it anyway. And so we'll measure from there. 3 inches. 3 inches. Those are all marked out. Now we're going to go ahead and put buttonholes in those spots. All right, and that is how you use the Lutterloh pattern making system. This system is literally so cool. I have really grown to love it after all the time that I've been using it and throughout all the things that I've made. It truly has become my new favorite way to make my clothes. I love that it's compact. I love that this system has so many patterns in there that I can draw from and not only make exactly as they're intended, but to hack. If you really enjoyed learning about this system and want to give it a go ahead and head over to their website. I'll have it linked in my description below. And be sure to use my code Kaylee15 to save some money on your purchase. I really appreciate you watching my video. If you liked it, please hit the like button and please subscribe if you haven't yet. I'd love to have you join the Bloom Sewing Studio family. Now, without further ado, let's get into some of those shots showing my final product made with the Lutterloh pattern making system. I'll see you guys next time.